Thank you. Thank you. I think it was very nice of Jeff and Al and Chase to invite me to have a show here in January. And I'm really pleased to show you some of the work that I've done that's really based on travels. I was telling Chase and Al earlier that fundamentally what I like to do is get out on the road about 3 or 4 times a month and just travel back roads. Try to find something that really is really important to me in terms of what the landscape looks like, what the shape of the landscape is, what the rhythm of the landscape is. So basically what I've tried to do in the paintings, for instance, in this one of marble, making several trips. I think I made probably 8 or 9 trips to marble over the years. A lot of them while I was teaching here at Western. And then more recently, just a year ago, I went there and the marble factory in Marble, Colorado, was under new ownership. And they had changed the whole view of the landscape. Things had changed. They had put marble all over the place. It was stacked up, which I had never seen before. So that became really the impetus for the painting that you see behind me. It was the rhythm, pretty much the rhythm of the Crystal area, the Crystal River, the mountains behind this stone yard of all these strategically placed pieces of marble. I found the rhythm being really exciting. So consequently, this is what was the end result. I thought, first of all, it would be much more abstract than that. But as I painted it, more pieces of marble started to emerge in the concept of painting. I usually spend about 3 months, about 3 weeks to 4 weeks on each painting. And paint and repaint. I do maybe 4 or 5 undercoats of paint before I even start the painting. So I'll paint with a real soft and fluid solution of paint first, and then after I do that, then I come back in and start figuring out what the rhythm of the painting will be. And so I really didn't expect that to be that realistic. I wanted it to be more abstract, but that's what came out. So from that painting, let's move on to Albion. Albion's kind of my ancestral home. My great-grandfather, he homesteaded in Nebraska, so you'll see quite a few paintings that are done in Nebraska because I'm there often. And when I'm there, I go out on these side trips to different places around, and it never gets really old. So this is just that rhythm of hills in that part of Nebraska, which is kind of the northeast, which is very hilly. And for what I'm doing, it's absolutely perfect because it has that rhythm, it has that kind of movement. I take a lot of liberties with the color, so I change the color radically as I paint along. Should we move on down to the next one? So I have family that live in Indiana. So what we do is when we travel to Indiana, and we do it maybe 2 or 3 times a year, we try to find a different way to go. We never go on the interstates. We always go on what we used to call in the old days the blue roads. Today, if you look on the map, they're all yellow and orange roads. Those are the secondary roads. So we always travel the secondary roads and find out if anything is different along the way. And so I was coming back, and we were coming back from Valparaiso, Indiana, and I thought to Carolyn, I said, if you take I-80 and you start going out of Illinois, you have a choice when you get to the Quad Cities of going up around the Quad Cities or going the other way. And if you go the other way, you go through Moline. And I went to Moline, and we turned off of the highway, and we went into a back road that went down to the river, to the Mississippi. And so along the Mississippi, I saw this same kind of rhythm, this kind of bluffy area. And I had sketched it in my book, and I do like 5-minute sketches, very fast, and all I do is kind of rhythmatic sketches. And what I use when I sketch is not regular pencils. I use leads that can be put into a holder. And then leads that can be, if you guys, you've all seen them, haven't you? If you haven't, I got them in my case here. I can show you what they are. But anyway, you don't have to worry about sharpening them. You just put a lead in your holder, and you go and so things really change radically. All it is just a very basic idea of what it's like. It's all about rhythm, and it's all about shape, and it's all about movement. So basically, that's what we see. So I found something by going off the beaten path that lent itself to my way of thinking. Consequently, the color changed. I never used any color. I may sometimes make little notes, but once I get it onto my painting wall and I start painting, everything changes radically anyway, so it doesn't make much difference. So Moline, Illinois was really a nice find and a nice place, and it fit me very fine. This is an earlier painting. This is one that I did. This is probably the third oil painting that I did. Oh, I got to tell you a story since Jerry and Arlene are here. The last year I was here, I think both of them went hiking in Escalante. Have you ever been in the Escalante steps? You go on Highway 24. It's like 9 miles past Green River, isn't it, Jerry? You go past Green River, Coal. Yeah, when you pass Green River, it's about 9 miles, and you hit that turn off to Hanksville. Right. That goes down into. Yeah, it goes all the way down into the steps of. So anyway, the very first oil painting that I did, once I started working, as soon as I got my studio built, that was something like, must have been like 8 years later that I had the talk with Jerry that I actually started painting in oil. And that painting was a stormy day in Escalante. So we went down to the Escalante. It was incredible because the first thing that we saw after we left Hanksville, and we were about 10 or 12 miles outside of Escalante, the little town of Escalante, a whole herd of I guess they were all wild turkeys, were going across the road. And all these wild turkeys were everywhere. And I thought, my God, can I draw wild turkeys on the move? Can I possibly? So I started out, and it was an absolute disaster. They didn't have the rhythm that I wanted, so I just stopped working with those. But anyway, that was my first painting that I did in oil. And that was like 10 years after I actually got to Escalante down there. It was really a nice trip. This is one of the earlier ones as well. This is like number 3 in the series of paintings in oil that I did. And it was something that I saw going down the highway all the time. I'd always pull into Newcastle if I happened to be going to Denver for some reason, I'd pull into Newcastle or Silt or one of those towns and just go around. And I always went through Parachute. And I always drove down around the town of Parachute to see what was there. And this one mountain hill kept popping up. And I really didn't know what it was until quite a few years later. I just asked the person that I knew that had lived in Parachute. And I said, what is that big hill mountain that has this incredible crevice that goes down inside? And she told me it was Mount Callahan. And so I end up doing this painting, which is a little bit different than many of the other ones because of the rhythm. But as I painted it, and as I got back in my studio and looked at it, I could actually see the rhythm start to take shape with the in and out configuration of the lines and all that. Well, while we're at this point, what I do after I put in all the layers of paint, if I think I'm done, but I'm not quite sure that I'm done with the painting, I'll take it outside, and I never do this inside. I take it outside, sit up on my sawhorses, I put down a big 4x8 sheet of plywood, and I lay the painting flat, and I just smother the painting with retouch varnish. And I get all of my stuff from Utrecht. I buy all my paints from Utrecht. I buy all my varnish. They're the only ones that make varnish in a spray can. The reason I do that is I don't want to disturb the surface of the canvas with putting it on with cotton swabs or using a soft-haired brush to put it on. So I spray it and I just flood the surface with it because I know that it's going to be absorbed by the paint. It's going to be there, and retouch varnish over a period of a year or so dissipates anyway. It's gone. But it leaves just a little tiny sheen, a little bit of a sheen, but not much. So that's kind of like third in the series. This one is probably, I would say, maybe halfway through the series. All these have been done in the last 3 years. And like I was saying before, I try to spend as much time, some are longer, sometimes I go a month. Sometimes I set one aside and take another painting, and it might go 6 weeks before I get back to it and paint it, but I try to get the painting done in 3 weeks if I can. This one is from New Mexico. It was one of those situations where I went to Abacu. I went to, who was from Abacu? Do anybody know? What famous artist, female artist from Abacu? George O'Keeffe. George O'Keeffe, that was where she lived, in Abacu. And so I just left Abacu in the morning, and I came up through this little town of Cibola. And it was early morning. We left in the dark, and because I wanted to try to get up the road, we were going to Durango, and we were taking that back road to Durango rather than going 285 coming back to Gunnison. So what I did was, I told Carolyn, I said, let's leave early so we can be going at first light. We can be going to see what the light does to these really rough red hills. But in the morning, they were more violet than they were red. So this is kind of the result of that experience. And I really stylized the red rocks that were cascading down. It was early morning, and so they looked more violet to me, more crimson to me, so I just did that. And rather than trying to repeat this element again throughout the picture, it seemed just more reasonable and to create the rhythm I wanted was to cascade all of the movement of the painting in a downward kind of fashion. Let's move on. This was like, of the paintings in this room, this is like number 2 in probably number 2, and I'm just trying to get my bearings again. I think probably it came in between marble and the one that I did back there of Genoa, Nebraska. So what I did was you guys you've all been through Cimarron, right? Little town of Cimarron, going to Montrose. You guys get out of town? Okay. So if you go back in, take the road in, you can go all the way in and you can walk in to where all the rock has fallen from the hills around, because you're in the canyon, you're in the Black Canyon, and the rocks have fallen, and it's just an incredible experience to get back there, because you have this whole bed of rock, and then you have the walls of Black Canyon coming down, which is really spectacular place. When I was still teaching here at Western, we used to put in our raft in at that area and float down. And the park people, we had to get our inflatable boat in the river and start down the river, the Gunnison, before the park officials could stop us. So, and then we'd go all the way down, float down, and that was before Crystal Dam. So we would float down as much as we could, and we caught brown trout. God, they were huge. They were enormous brown trout. And then we'd go down to the Crystal River, and then we'd walk out 9 miles and come out on the north side of the Black Canyon. So that was really kind of an experience thing, but this is really the result of that, the rocks and all that. So should we jump over, across the room?
Do you folks have any questions?
Oh, questions at this point. Yeah, I'm sorry, you guys. Any questions?
You ever wake up at night thinking of these things?
Oh, God.
In the studio?
I think, you know, if you have a painting on the easel and things don't come together right away, and you're really kind of fighting with, what do you do next? Yeah, you spend a good part of the night trying to resolve that some way, just tossing that over and over in your mind. And particularly if you work on one for quite a while, then you could lose a lot of sleep over it. I try not to. So anyway, this kind of, I would say this is the one painting that started me on kind of a different direction, a much more fluid direction in painting, where some of the others, Moline was one of the more fluid ones, and here I'm just really playing much more with the color, and I'm playing really much more exaggerating the movement, exaggerating the fluidness of oil painting. And I just got so fond of using cobalt blue with black. It just seemed right, because you can thin it out. You can thin it out with different mediums, and you can just really change the whole character of the painting. So you can see the cobalt blue mixed with ivory black that comes in, and it makes it turn kind of a green, particularly if you use a little bit of yellow with it. And then play with the purity of the color as you come down, and then just exaggerate the rhythm all the way down from a very, bombastic kind of quality that you get from the black and the green, and then subtly move down until you get down, and hardly any of the the blue-black in the lower parts of the painting. Creates that effect. So I was mentioning to you that Nebraska is kind of my ancestral home. That's where family is, and that's where I was born, and that's where we go often, we go back often. So whenever I go back there, I try to go within like a 60-mile radius around the area, finding different things that visually seemed like they would make a good painting. And so one of those places, a little town to the south of Albion, where I was born, is a town called Genoa. And Genoa sits up, and just a few miles outside of Genoa is the Loup River Valley. The Loup River, here you have the Loup breaks off going up into the Sandhills of Nebraska into what we call the North Loop area. And so Genoa then became a painting that was interesting because all the fields south of town in that Loup Valley were cultivated, and they had been plowed. And it was like a spring plowing kind of thing. So it was kind of in the spring, and I started with this all green. I thought, my God, what a boring relationship of all greens. I could modify the greens with violets and stuff like that. But then I thought, well, why don't you go to complementary? Go close to complementary. So complementary colors were always kind of a theme for me. So you have like orange. It's not orange-red. They're not opposite on the color wheel, but they create that same kind of effect, and then the greens, and then the violets in between, just to give a little bit of a feeling for that. So this is kind of like midway through the painting process this last 3 or 4 years. And there's another one of Nebraska. So the family farm is in an area about 12 miles north of Albion. And a little town in between there is called Loretto. Well, you can stay on Highway 14 and go up to the farm that way, or you can go through Loretto and you take a back road with really steep hills. Like I mentioned before, in that area of Nebraska, it's all hilly and big ravines all over. And so this painting was a result of that many, many trips coming down the road back in here and coming back. And I took a lot of liberties with it where I didn't use the ivory black like I've used in other places. I decided to use almost straight cobalt blue and then just a touch of Mars black in with that other color, and then made it more strikingly rhythmatic in terms of its up and down movement as we go along. I really don't like skies very well. I mean, skies are beautiful and cloud shapes are beautiful, but they don't lend itself to what I want to do with paint. So I try to avoid that if I can, to just keep the rhythm that I'm looking for in the painting. And even though this might have been sky, if I was a realist painter, I would have probably had to add a lot of white, which I didn't want to do. So I just came in and made it look like it's just more of the landscape behind it, which it really wasn't. So that's artist's prerogative, right? Artist's prerogative to do that. This is one of the more recent ones as well. This kind of falls in the same range. This is within the last year, same as Moline within the last year. And this one was, again, crossing Iowa, coming into where the Missouri River drops down into the valley, the bluffs were just incredible. So what I tried to do was to show the feeling of those bluffs, the concept that the river could be somewhere in there, but I didn't want to paint a river. So, but the hills were coming together, and this bluff-like relationship of forms and shapes. But for some reason, the violets just seemed to be striking. And so I really carried that idea through of using that color in that relationship with the ivory black, some Mars black, and the cobalt blue. And then using that again as the complementary of purple, yellow, using the idea of using opposites on the color wheel, which I use a lot in a lot of the paintings. This one here was one of the earlier ones as well. And I say earlier, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. And this painting, again, Nebraska, another town just north of Albion. The town is called Albion. Really nice little town. But again, these really big hills. And I just happened to be going up Highway 14 there, off to one side. I saw it was all cloudy, except it was illuminated by an opening in the clouds. And this harvested wheat field was just absolutely yellow. It was just remarkable. I had never seen anything quite like that. And then all of the trees and the brush that were in between where the harvested field was, I thought, I'm not going to paint trees. So what I did was I got my ivory black out, and I thought, okay, I'm going to do ivory black and cobalt blue, and I just started trying to create that rhythm and movement and get the shapes that I wanted to get as I went through the painting. And then it just seemed right to go from a very light relationship in terms of the color, go pure chrome yellow, and then whiten it down to a more of a cream-like color, and then letting it just very simply fade off. But then I saw something too that I thought was really kind of interesting. All of the shrubs and the bushes, I didn't want to make them shrub-like. I wanted to keep that rhythm going, and I wanted to keep that shapes going. So I played with that shape of those bushes as just big yellow shapes. And that's basically what I'm all about, and that's what I do. I just have to say one last thing. It's really been my good fortune over the years that I was able to go ahead and travel as much as I have, and every 3 times a month or so, go out and go someplace different. And I have a wife that really understands that, and she's an avid reader. So while I'm out there doing these little 5-minute sketches, she's sitting in the car reading, which is really great. Let me just lastly just show you. Is my portfolio down here somewhere? Oh, it's down on the next. It's down on the next bench. Let me go grab that. Yeah. So what you do is you just have a little sharpener. You put it on there, and you can sharpen up the leads. Well, it really works slick. And then do just really quick sketches like that. On this one, I just put cobalt blue, ivory black, yellow to gray for loop. And just get a feel for the rhythm of that. Works out great. So, any questions, guys? I want you to see that and
Margaret, yeah, Margaret's got a question. Yeah.
yes, Margaret.
Do you use like abstract forms in all of your paintings, or is it just the series that you're doing really focusing on the abstract?
Well, yes, I do. I use all abstract forms in everything that I do. But they become more figured, more, what's the right word? More representational. I was much more abstract before. I did a whole series of things that were what I call the floating square series. And so it was just a series of squares floating on a surface. And they were all done in acrylics. And I stayed with that series for maybe 10 years or so. So the result of that was quite a few paintings. And then I did a lot of acrylic collages as well. And I'd cut out pieces, make all kinds of different squares, put them all over the surface. And so, yeah, these I would really call figurative works, where the other ones were absolutely non-figurative. If you can really say that about any painting as being non-figurative.
So, any other questions? Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is there one aspect or element that you either use in a lot of your works or that you like use and then leave and then keep coming back to?
Oh yeah. If something that I found really I think has promise in terms of really being important in the whole artistic process, and certainly I do that. Yeah, you betcha.
In your artistic process, do you choose the colors you're going to use by the end? Because your sketches are in black and white, right?
Yeah.
So like whenever you're sketching it, do you think of the colors you're going to apply to your painting, or that's just like, I don't know.
Oh yeah, I know exactly what you're saying. Generally, I have a color idea,
Okay.
but usually the color idea is pretty flawed, because I'll make a note in there, and you know, once you get in the landscape, all you really see during the summertime is green.
Yeah.
And so you can do a lot of variations with green, but it's much more visually interesting, particularly if you're working in kind of an abstract way, to make the colors abstract as well.
Okay.
You know, and just really play with the color like you're playing with shapes and forms. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to introduce
Hi Tina.
you.
Hi Tina.
I was going to introduce
I
you.
know Tina. That's Tina. That's Tina Johnson.
That's before I was married.
Married. Yeah.
Yeah, I got to have him for my drawing class, but also for my painting class.
Painting class,
and then
right.
I got to see a series that he had started on. I think it was pretty new, of what you were talking about, going down into Blue Mesa and being on these rafts and these crevices in the rocks.
Yeah.
And you taught for so many years, and you, I think, have an understanding of what the students go through. If you had to give a young artist advice, you had to look back at, you know, those years of being a young artist, what advice would you give them?
Well, you know, I think it's really important that you kind of find a direction. You find a direction sometime within the 4 years. You know, I mean, I know it's a search. It's a search that goes on from your freshman year all the way through your senior year. Some people never resolve that, and they go on and do whatever they're going to do. But if you have an idea of what you want to do, and if art really becomes an important aspect of that, then there's a lot of possibilities out there. I mean, there's so many directions you can go. But my feeling is that if you're really passionate and you really love what you're doing, then pursue it. It means if you have to go to New York, go to New York. You know, if you have to, if you like Portland, Oregon, go to Portland. There'll be a support group. Doesn't matter where you go, you'll find a support group. And I think that's really, that's an important thing. I think maintaining, if you do feel passionate about something, do it. I look at my three boys, and one was an early boarder. My oldest boy was a snowboarder. He passionately loved boarding. And he was in the same thing as Burton. He and Burton knew each other, and they would set up different things. Matter of fact, he ended up being like the primary hiring for judges when it was first getting started, when snowboarding was first getting started, you know, way back in 68, 69, and 70. And so he ended up working for Burton, but that's what he liked doing. So he ended up hiring judges for the Olympics, and he would set up venues for him. So if that's the direction life takes you, I say go for it, you know. Yeah, whatever you feel passionate about, do it. I hope it's art.
Any other questions? Thank you, Lee.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome.